Clarion, and I'm also a faculty member at the School of Medicine. I'd like to welcome everybody at this late part of the morning. We have a terrific turnout for a terrific speaker and a terrific topic. This lecture is part of the lecture series in clinical ethics that we sponsor at the Fairbanks Center. This is probably the fifth or sixth such lecture that we've done this year. We're offering about 8 or 9 offerings over the course of the academic year. And we're very privileged to have this is not a repeat performance in the sense that, because Richard has not given this lecture, I think, ever before, but Richard has been a perennial favorite for our series, and he's one of my personal heroes. So Richard Gunderman is Vice Chairman of the Department of Radiology and Director of Pediatric Radiology at Riley Hospital, and is an Associate Professor in Radiology, Pediatrics, Medical Education, Philosophy, Liberal Arts, and Philanthropy at the School of Medicine and IUPUI. I think, I've said this before, but I think Richard holds the land speed record for completing a PhD from the Committee on Social Thought at the University of Chicago, where he also did his medical degree. And I think, never come away from a lecture that Richard's given not seeing the world a little bit differently. So I'm really, really looking forward to what he has to say today.
Well, thanks so much for being here today. I hope this will be a stimulating discussion on a topic that, at least in my experience, doesn't get the attention it deserves. For some people, it's a thorn in the side. For other people, it's an important source of inspiration. But for all of us, this topic of miracles, I think, is relevant to contemporary healthcare and our lives as health professionals, not only in terms of our careers, but our lives as human beings. This is Methodist Hospital. There are hospitals around the country with names like Presbyterian Hospital, Lutheran Hospital. There are hospitals in this city with names like St. Francis and St. Vincent's Hospital. There is Mount Sinai Hospital, Jewish Hospital. What's the point of that? That many of our institutions of healthcare, our hospitals, have at least very explicitly religious backgrounds. It's no accident that they have names like Methodist Hospital. And I think to some degree we betray our own legacy if we fail to pause from time to time to think about the role of religion and faith in our lives, not only as healthcare givers, but as patients and family members of the ill. So today we'll talk about this subject of miracles, on which I am absolutely not an expert, but about which I've been thinking for some time, I suppose at least a few decades, and I thought now might be a convenient time to pause and reflect on what I think are some of the most interesting questions about miracles. What's that? Right. It's Moses parting what? Yeah, the Red Sea. That's actually the subject of some scholarly dispute. It may in fact be the Sea of Reeds, but anyway, he's parting a body of water. Who's playing Moses? Yeah, Charlton Heston. In fact, that's not an image of Charlton Heston, but you know, it's an iconic. It's iconic in our national imagination. The image of Charlton Heston as Moses, and this could be regarded as a miracle. How did this happen? Many of us would say, well, that's a silly question because we all know it didn't happen. This is not a historical event, but something on the order of myth, intended to enhance our understanding of human affairs or the relationship between the divine and human beings, but is not meant as a description of a historical event. But it'll be interesting in our conversation to think about the possibility that miracles may in fact be historical events, not in the sense that they are contained in our history books, but that they did indeed happen at particular places, at particular times, involving real flesh and blood human beings. What is a miracle? Well, that's really the subject of today's conversation. The word comes from a Latin root, miraculum, meaning something that is wondrous, something that inspires wonder. What do the Germans call miracles? German speakers. Wunder, which means what? Wonder. The idea that a miracle is something wondrous. And in fact, this goes all the way back to the Greeks. There's a kind of tumor that we see from time to time called a teratoma. It comes from a Greek root meaning monster. Why? Because those tumors sometimes contain extraordinary things, like hair and teeth and bones, and so it's really a quite extraordinary tumor. But that same Greek word, terata, again means wonders. It's not merely something horrifying, but something awe-inspiring. Do we have place in the contemporary world of medicine for wonders, for awe? As a preliminary suggestion, if we have become so busy, so preoccupied with the scientific and technological dimensions of the work we do, that we have effectively crowded awe out of our daily lives, then we have made a mistake. And maybe it's time to rethink how we practice medicine or nursing or chaplaincy or social work or hospital administration or whatever it is that each of us does. Here's something rather extraordinary. What do these two images represent? Anybody? Twins. What about those twins? Dizygotic is correct. Very good. What else? What about one of those zygotes? One of the one-celled organisms from which one of these human beings developed. Well, it had a chromosomal anomaly, didn't it? The brother in this set of twins has Down syndrome, or trisomy 21, which is pretty apparent from just a glance at him. That is a 1 in a million event. One of two twins afflicted with Down syndrome. Does that qualify as a miracle? I think most of us would say, miracle, a miracle is something that happens very rarely. A miracle is an exceptional, rare, unusual event. The more unusual, the more potentially miraculous. I think that is a terrible, terrible misconception of what a miracle might be. By the way, I don't speak ex cathedra here. I'm not propounding church doctrine. I'm just sharing with you my own reflections. And my intention here is not to be instructive, but to be provocative. I'm hoping we'll all leave here maybe scratching our heads, maybe move to renew some conversations we haven't been part of for a while. There's a professor at Cambridge University, a mathematician. His name is J.E. Littlewood. There's Littlewood's law about miracles. What does Littlewood's law say about miracles? It says, let's say a miracle is a 1 in a million event. Something that happens only 1 out of every million instances. You get a miracle. Let's assume that events occur at the rate of 1 per second throughout our waking day. Okay? There's an event every second that we're awake, that we're aware of. If that's true, how often do you and I experience miracles? If a miracle is a 1 in a million event, how often are you and I witnessing miracles? Well, the answer, if you do the math, is that each of us see a miracle about every 35 days. That's a terrible notion of what a miracle is. Why 1 in a million? Why not 1 in 100,000? Why not 1 in 10 million? Why not 1 in a billion? That's an utter misunderstanding of what miracles are to try to describe their frequency. The very effort to quantify the phenomenon betrays a deep misunderstanding of what we're trying to describe. Who's this guy? He's one of the most important modern philosophers. He hails from Scotland, or hailed from Scotland. It's David Hume. Hume has dominated our understanding of miracles. According to Hume, what is a miracle? According to Hume, a miracle is the same thing as magic. A miracle is a transgression of a law of nature by a deity or an invisible agent. Be careful before you accept that definition of a miracle. Before you take that sucker's bet that a miracle is a transgression of a natural law. This absolutely dominates our contemporary understanding of what a miracle is. But that has not, in fact, been the dominant view of what miracles are throughout most of the Judeo-Christian tradition, at least. Who's this guy? One of the most famous Americans of the 20th century, an immigrant. Anybody recognize him? We've all heard of him. It's Harry Houdini. Right? The escape artist, the magician. Houdini, in the year 1920, published a very interesting book. It's called Miracle Mongers and Their Methods, a complete expose. There are people who still make their living doing this today, debunking the miraculous, right? Somebody can bend spoons with their mind, right? I can show how they're not doing it with their mind. It's some kind of magic trick. Is that what we mean by miracles? Are miracles debunkable events that somebody can explain away according to scientific or technological principles? I think not. And by the way, there are people today who earn their living doing this. There are some very important 20th century interpreters of the book we call the Bible. Bauer, Strauss, and Renan, who thought to explain away the miracles of Jesus Christ on natural grounds. How did Jesus do what he did? Well, there are naturalistic explanations every time. Lazarus wasn't really dead. Lazarus was just in a coma. Lazarus was in a persistent vegetative state. You know, Lazarus ate some of the wrong mushrooms that day. But he's going to wake up. And Jesus knew that and exploited his scientific knowledge to convince people, basically to defraud people, into thinking he could perform miracles. So great is the rational antipathy to miracles. Who are these guys? Yeah, on the left we all recognize which president? Where does Jefferson fit in the line? Our third president, Thomas Jefferson. Who's that guy on the right? An even more important human being in the great scheme of things than our third president. It's Leo Tolstoy, the great Russian novelist Leo Tolstoy. They both regarded miracles in the Bible as such an embarrassment, as such great offenses to reason, that they both, independently, a century apart, did extraordinarily hubristic things. What did they do? Anybody? They rewrote the Bible. Jefferson and Tolstoy produced versions of what we call the New Testament with the miracles expunged. Why? Because they were offenses to reason. This whole miracle thing is just a stumbling block to get at the real message of the Bible, which is ethical. Love your neighbor, right? That's what the Bible's really about. The miracles are just stumbling blocks for modern people. Are they right about that? Well, let's see. What's that image depict? Yeah, the temptation of Christ. The temptation to do what? Yeah, rule over the earth. To turn a stone into bread and break his 40-day fast. What else? To jump off the cliff, right, and be saved by the angels. That's what this contemporary notion of a miracle is to us. It's a temptation, one we need to resist. The idea that a miracle is an unlikely event, the idea that a miracle is a supernatural event, that's a temptation we need to resist. If that's all miracles are, then maybe they're not worth defending in the way I want to defend them today. How many of us would pray that the Colts make it to the Super Bowl? How many of us would pray that the United States prevails in an armed conflict? How many of us experience gratitude toward God, the divine, when the outcome is favorable to us? You know, I was in this big crack up on the road. I should have died, but somehow I survived. It was a miracle that I survived. What would that imply about the people who didn't survive? What would that imply about the team that we beat to get to the Super Bowl? What would that imply about the citizens and, in fact, the soldiers of the nation that we defeated in war? That God didn't care about them? I wonder. God doesn't care for the losers? Is that the implication? I'm not sure. Somebody might wonder, if God's protecting us, why does He, she put us in such dangerous situations in the first place? But I find it hard to believe somehow. This is just a confession. This is not theology, just a personal confession, that God doesn't care about those other people who don't make it. That's just hard for me to assimilate. So maybe we want to move beyond using the word miracle just to refer to things we can't explain but fervently hope for. What if these ideas of miracles, that miracles are unlikely events or supernatural events, right? The transgression of a natural law. What if those are in fact deep, deep misunderstandings of the miraculous? Who's that? C.S. Lewis, really one of the greatest intellectual polymaths of the 20th century. Lewis said, "Sustaining all of creation moment to moment is the greatest miracle of all, manifesting that God is always at work." Why say, there was a miracle 6,000 and some years ago. There was a miracle about 13.6 billion years ago. The universe was brought into being. Thereafter, everything's simply been following out the laws of physics and chemistry and biology, but there was a need for one initial miracle, one clockmaker to set things in motion. But after that, the universe can tend to itself. C.S. Lewis thought that was preposterous. He thought the continuance of the world was no less miraculous than its initial creation. Think about that. What if the very existence of something rather than nothing, minute to minute in our lives, is a kind of miracle? What if miracles are not rare things, but likely, common, and even certain things? Who's to say miracles are the things that shouldn't happen? What if miracles are the things that ought to happen? What if every fiber of creation points to miracles? What if our daily lives are suffused with the miraculous in a way most of us don't pause to reflect on? What if something that happens in this hospital every day, the birth of a baby, most often without incident, things happen just like they're supposed to, like they've happened for centuries, millennia, eons, the birth of a baby. What if that event is in fact a miracle every time it occurs? No violation of natural law, nothing particularly unexpected, but utterly miraculous to those who have eyes to see. What's that image? By the greatest painter in the history of the world. What's that image? It's the raising of Lazarus as portrayed by Rembrandt. If you ever get a chance, look at Rembrandt's paintings. You needn't look at much more to develop a deep appreciation for the miraculous, at least in the way I'm trying to to manifest the miraculous today. Think about this. Somebody walks in this room right now, strides up to the stage and says, "Rise, rise," and the remote control rises. You pass your hand between the remote control and that person's hand. There are no wires. What would we say? What if that person could make you 10 years younger? Poof! A decade drops away. What would we say about that person? Would we say, what? That's right. Where do we find him? That is one promising business model, right? You take off 10 years, 10 pounds, a few other things, you're going to have plenty of people beating a path to your door for a long time. Well, let's say that person can really do that. Does that mean, what do we do about that? Does each of us drop to our knees and bow down before that person with our hands clasped together and worship that person? Tell me what to do. I've never seen anybody levitate a remote control before. Never seen anybody take 10 years off somebody's life. You must be God. I'm going to follow you. You tell me what I need to do. I'm yours. Tell me what I should do. Is that the status of the miracles in the Bible? Hey, Moses, you really are a messenger of God. Nobody else could have parted that sea. Hey, Jesus, that thing you did with Lazarus, never seen anything like it. Tell me what to do. You can do something nobody else can do. Therefore, you're clearly the person whose moral teachings the rest of us should abide by. Is that good reasoning? Does that make sense? Does the ability to work magic tricks like nobody else prove that somebody is omnipotent, omniscient, and all good, the traditional attributes of God? Somebody passes through that wall. I'm not so sure that the magic is what's most important about the message. Maybe prophets aren't just cosmic magicians. Maybe even the ones who can't transgress natural laws are perfectly fit to enhance our understanding of moral laws. Martin Luther King didn't work any good parlor tricks, to my knowledge. Couldn't do much with a deck of cards. Mohandas Gandhi doesn't seem to have been interested in working wonders in that sense. But maybe these are people whose teachings count for a lot, despite the complete absence of magic from their acts. Consider this. How many cells do you have in your body? Modern biology is founded on the cell doctrine. The work of Robert Hooke, right, who looked through a microscope at a piece of cork and noticed it was divided into little compartments that reminded him of the cells in which monks reside, and he called them cells. Like in a monastery, hence we have cells today. How many cells do you have in your body? Well, the answer is likely something on the order of 75 trillion. That's the number 75 followed by 12 zeros. Of those are about a third are erythrocytes, red blood cells. Your red blood cells last 120 days on average. Therefore, you have to manufacture how many red blood cells every second. You could do the math. The number of seconds in 120 days. I'll tell you the answer. It's 2 million. In the time it takes me to say 2 million, you just made 2 million red blood cells, without which we can't transport oxygen through our bodies. That strikes me as awesome. How many of us understand how awesome the human organism really is? And not just the human organism, but one of the commensal bacteria in our guts, like E. coli. Pretty remarkable creature when you take the time to study it. How many of us are doing anything each day to enhance our appreciation for the wonders of the human organism? should we feel guilty that we're not doing more? I wonder. I have the sense that understanding anatomy and physiology and pathology and pathophysiology does not undermine our sense of the wonder of the human organism, but in fact deepens it. The more you know about biological science, the deeper your awe at what a living organism really is. Science and faith are not at war. In fact, science has the potential to deepen and enhance our appreciation for what an extraordinary miracle life really is. Ask any medical student, when you understand all the things that can go wrong in embryogenesis, to know that your child was born whole and healthy is all the more miraculous. And by the way, to know that your child has trisomy 21, or a club foot, or even anencephaly, the absence of a head, so to speak, is no less miraculous. It may not be as welcome, but the miracle of it I don't think is in any way diminished by the fact that sometimes things go awry. What's the point of all that? Becoming educated doesn't mean we have to engage ourselves in a program of debunking or demystifying. To be educated doesn't mean to see through everything. Right? Oh, that looks like a miracle, but I recognize it's really sleight of hand. That looks like a miracle, but I understand the molecular biology behind it. It's just science. There's no miracle there. Well, baloney. Maybe science isn't about, maybe faith isn't about demystifying or debunking. What did C.S. Lewis say about seeing through everything? Suppose you can see through everything. Yeah, that looks like a miracle, but it's really sleight of hand. And that sleight of hand is really grounded in mechanical physics. And mechanical physics is really based in quantum physics. Suppose you keep seeing through things. What happens? It was just a big wind that came along and parted the Red Sea. We know that now, right? Maybe. What's the point of that? What happens to the person who can see through everything? Everything. What happens? They're blind. Seeing through everything is the same thing as not seeing at all. We need something on which to fix our gaze. The question is what? And I would suggest whatever that is, we want it to be something with the greatest potential possible to enhance our sense of the awe, the wonder of life in broadest possible terms. Some of us feel cheated. I used to feel this way. If only I could meet Moses. I mean, how did I lose out in the cosmic lottery? If only I could have shaken hands with Jesus Christ personally. Is that too much to ask? I mean, if this faith thing is such a big deal, is it too much to ask that Jesus would take a few minutes out of His busy day and walk up to me, shake my hand, maybe work a few miracles, say bring one of my grandparents back to life so I could have a chat with them for a Sunday afternoon? You got me. That's all I need. I'm on your team. Tell me what to do, right? Then I could be faithful because I would have seen the miracles with my own eyes. I've come to think that's a rather egoistic and immature attitude about miracles and, in fact, about faith. Who did Jesus raise from the dead? Lazarus. Anybody seen Lazarus lately? Where's Lazarus? Come on, Jesus, if you're going to bring him back to life, give him immortality. Let him hang around for a couple of millennia, a few thousand years, so the nice people gathered in Pettigrew Auditorium on February 27, 2008 could see him, maybe shake his hand, maybe draw some blood and do a CAT scan, right? Then sign us up, right? We're believers. We've seen Lazarus. Lazarus, why not? Why isn't Lazarus here today? Anybody know the answer to that question? Guess what? Lazarus died. What's that tell us? Maybe that tells us, among other things, that growing old and dying are as natural a part of human life as being born and growing and developing. Death is every bit as essential a part of what we are and who we are as being born was 20 years ago or 80 years ago. Maybe suffering and death are somehow part of God's plan for our lives. That doesn't sound... I'm not sure I'm altogether happy about that. You know? You're struggling with a terrible migraine headache, a raging case of gastroenteritis, a toothache. You know, you're trying to pass a kidney stone. I really don't want some well-meaning clergyman telling me that this is part of God's plan for my life. You know, I'll take the morphine. Right? By the way, I work with miracles every day. I'm a radiologist, a pediatric radiologist based primarily at Riley Hospital. Every day, dozens, hundreds of times we peer inside the living human body without cutting it open. We can watch the heart beating in real time without opening the chest. We can watch the change in cerebral perfusion, blood flow in the brain as people perform different mental tasks. Maybe that's a miracle. Maybe miracles are around us every day, and the question is, do we see them? Who's that guy? Who is that? One of the most important Christian theologians in history, St. Augustine of Hippo. Whatever wonder happens in this world, it is certainly less wonderful than the whole world itself. Parting of the Sea of Reeds, the raising of Lazarus, that's heavy-duty stuff. But compared to what happens every minute of every day, in a universe that, so far as we know, and I have little doubt that we'll be shown to be wrong about this someday, but at the moment appears to be about 13.6 billion light years in diameter, maybe that dwarfs even the raising of Lazarus as a magic trick, a parlor trick. What's that image? It's by the greatest artist in the history of Western civilization. Who's that? Yeah, Rembrandt again, right? I'm not retracting what I said earlier. I'm sticking with Rembrandt. What should we learn from miracles? Number one, nurturing wonder does not threaten natural science. It fuels it. The more awed you are at the human body, the more you want to understand it. You might even approach your laboratory bench or your patient with the attitude that you are privileged to be revealing, uncovering, discovering, displaying, unearthing the wonders of human life and the living world in your laboratory or in your clinic. Far from deadening our sense of wonder, science can in fact enrich and deepen it. Our sense of wonder at the world and ourselves. Our goal shouldn't be to get rid of wonder, like excess baggage that we've been stuck with from medieval days. I would suggest our goal should be to enhance our sense of wonder. Here's an interesting formulation. Wonder is not the residue, but the wellspring of wisdom. Wonder isn't what's left over when we reach the limits of what we understand. Okay, boom, we just hit a wall of our own ignorance. After that, we'll call it wonder. Wrong. That's exactly wrong. Antithetical to the deeper truth. The deeper truth is that wonder is the wellspring of wisdom. It's from our sense of wonder that we're inspired to begin asking questions to begin with. Who's that guy? It's Plato, who wrote dialogues about Socrates. Plato said that wonder is the feeling of the philosopher, and philosophy begins in wonder. Remember, a synonym for wonder is miracle or the miraculous. Philosophy begins in a sense of wonder, in a sense that we've seen something miraculous in a sense. That's what philosophy is all about. Who's this? Well, that's Plato's most famous student, Aristotle. Aristotle says, it was wonder that first led men to philosophize and still does. And here's one more, a near contemporary of ours, one of the great mathematicians of the 20th century. That's Alfred North Whitehead. Philosophy begins in wonder, and at the end, when philosophy has done its best, the wonder remains. Why do I keep citing philosophy and philosophers? Because philosophy is the love of wisdom. Not just knowledge, not just information, but wisdom, the highest level of human understanding. It begins in wonder. It's our wonder at things that moves us to inquire about them. That's an interesting idea. What's that image? Yeah, it's Rembrandt's sketch of the Good Samaritan. Think about the miracles in the Gospels. Think about the miracles, for example, the wonders in the Gospel of John. What are they? I think they're signs, aren't they? They're signs of something. What do you mean signs? They signify something. They mean something. They're not just parlor tricks. They're not just transgressions of natural laws. They mean something. What do they mean? Well, among other things, perhaps they reveal God's remarkable activity in the world. Think about what Jesus does. Helping the blind to see, opening the eyes of the blind. Why that instead of something else? Helping the lame to walk. Why that instead of something else? Sharing new life, the raising of Lazarus. Why that and not something else? I'm not interested in denying that Jesus might have been a miracle worker. But maybe what we really need to focus our understanding on is what kind of miracle worker he was. What do his miracles do? They make ordinary people like us bigger than life. They stir our emotions. They prod our imaginations, right? These human experiences, some of them are born of suffering and illness. If everybody had sight, there'd be no need to open the eyes of the blind. If everybody could walk, there'd be no need to enable the lame to rise up. If Lazarus hadn't died, there would have been no opportunity to raise him from death. What's the point of that? That what we regard as the afflictions of human life may be some of the most important occasions for us to enhance our understanding of what's truly wondrous. I'm reminded of a patient of mine. A year ago to this day, I was at her funeral. She was about 2 years old when she died. She had leukemia. When she went for a 1-year well baby visit. And the pediatrician noticed bruising, ordered some blood tests. Within 24 hours, she was in a hospital having a central line placed so she could start her chemotherapy for leukemia. On that day, her mother looked over at her father and said, "You know what? We are entrusting our most precious possession in the whole world to complete strangers." Never met any of these doctors or nurses before. Never set foot in this hospital. How can we do this? She died. She died just after her second birthday. Did God deprive us of a miracle? Did God say, "No, not this time. No miracle for you today"? I can't bring myself to say that. I've got to think that every day in the life of that little girl, including the days when her whole gastrointestinal tract, her mouth were covered with sores, that she had fungus growing in her blood, that she had to be kept sedated because life was too miserable, that even then something miraculous was going on. The words that were spoken at her funeral, the day her mother looked over at her father and said, "You know, we're entrusting our most precious possession in the whole world to complete strangers." That's wondrous. It's not only wondrous that her parents could do that, it's wondrous that we could live up to that kind of hope, that we could prove ourselves worthy of that kind of trust. That's an immense privilege, something on the order of wondrous, I'd be inclined to say. So I agree completely with David Hume to this extent. Miracle is a word we should use carefully. We should think about it when we utter it. But that's not to say we should use it only rarely. In fact, maybe we'd be living somewhat better lives if the word miracle or wonder found its way into our vocabulary a little bit more often. Here's something miraculous. The last person in the world anybody would have expected to stop and render aid does exactly that. The Samaritan, the outcast, the pariah, stops and renders aid to a human being in need. The guy from Afghanistan, the guy from Iraq, the North Korean stops and renders aid. It wasn't the doctor or the nurse or the chaplain on the staff of Methodist Hospital. It was the North Korean who stopped and rendered aid. Think about that. There's something wondrous there. Maybe it doesn't transgress any natural laws, but it's no less wondrous, awe-inspiring, and instructive for the rest of us. What's that image? It's Rembrandt again. It's the parable of the prodigal son. Look at the hands of the father. That's a miracle. Same 10 fingers you and I have. Those are not 6-fingered hands. Those are not hands that levitate things. Those aren't hands who bring the dead back to life. Those are hands just like yours and mine. But if you want to see a miracle depicted in art, you don't have to look to Charlton Heston. You don't have to look to the parting of the Sea of Reeds or even the raising of Lazarus. That too is perhaps miraculous in its own way. Look at those hands. Those hands are wondrous. So I'm going to conclude now, because the goal of talking about something like this, which is somewhat risky from my point of view. From my point of view, it takes a little foolhardiness or maybe something vaguely resembling courage to stand up and talk about something like this in a 21st century hospital. It's not the sort of thing we think about usually, but I think it's something we need to think about. Not all of us will come out on the same page. We'll leave here with radically different notions about whether miracles are worth talking and thinking about and how we feel about them. But nonetheless, it's reflection and conversation in which perhaps more of us will want to engage. But I want to make a few concluding remarks, just a minute or two. One is that disbelief in miracles, somebody who says there are no miracles, that's not a sign of wisdom. That's a sign of pride. We don't quite understand the world well enough to say for sure what's possible and what's not. Nobody had a right to expect that father to welcome home his prodigal son. Couldn't have predicted that, but it happened. Nobody could have predicted that the Samaritan would have been the one who stopped and rendered aid to the dying and perhaps apparently dead man laying by the side of the road. Wisdom isn't explaining away miracles. Wisdom is not explaining away miracles. Wisdom is not seeing through miracles. Wisdom is giving them their due. Wisdom is learning to experience the wonder that the world summons us to, that the people around us invite us to perceive and appreciate and marvel at. Miracles, if you want to be on the lookout for miracles, beware. You've got to engage your capacity for surprise. You've got to open yourself up to the possibility that the theological virtue that most befits our lives is hope. Not hope that every patient with cancer, not the expectation that every patient with cancer will be miraculously cured. Not the hope that someday the National Institute on Aging will conquer mortality and we won't have to worry about death anymore. But a very different kind of hope. A hope not that will extend our days, but a hope that will make the most of the days we're privileged to enjoy, like today. Doesn't have to start on Thursday. So maybe even things that we take positively granted, like human freedom and human creativity, are in fact wondrous in their own way. That somebody could paint that is wondrous. That somebody could write the story of the prodigal son is wondrous. And I'd submit it's no less wondrous in the hearing than in the telling. In other words, if we can look at stories like that and appreciate some degree of the magnitude of wonder that they contain, then we'll be leading richer and more complete human lives. I'm going to stop there and hope that some people have some questions or comments about that. I'm sure I got some things wrong. I just can't tell which ones they were. Please. Yeah, you see that. Patients, whose cancer is cured, patients who suffered serious trauma yet survived to tell the tale, people who've survived, plane crashes and so forth. Some of those people, at least, do have the sense that they've been given a new lease on life and feel some kind of calling to a new life. I was kind of sleepwalking before now, but having been through this, I realize that my life has more potential than I ever supposed. I've got to try to lead a bigger life. I've got to try to lead a life that will make a greater contribution than I aspired to before this misfortune befell me. That's precisely the sense I think each of us might want to cultivate. in our friends, in our children, and in ourselves. And maybe we don't have to wait until some disaster befalls us to begin to cultivate that sense. One of the truly wondrous things about human beings is that we can learn from vicarious experience. The American Shakespeare Company's in town this week, or next week, one or the other. They're performing The Merchant of Venice and Henry V. Go see Henry V, or rent the Kenneth Branagh movie of Shakespeare's Henry V. Watch it. See if you can emerge from that experience without a sense, something tugging at you, that you can do more. You can lead an even more significant life than you suppose. There's something wondrous in that. And I say again, I think it's wonderful that drama and literature and just daily conversation can allow us to experience some sense of that potential without actually going through those experiences firsthand. So a book like the Bible, which is, among other things, chock full of stories. Read the book of Genesis carefully. Read the Gospel of John carefully. Those stories are opportunities for just that sort of vicarious experience, the opportunity to nourish our imaginations, our sense of what's really possible. And that idea of imagination, there's something wondrous in that. Somehow, apparently different from the other creatures with whom we share the earth, we are able to look at the way things are and wonder why they aren't different. We don't have to rest with our current level of understanding. We could try to understand this thing better. That's a tremendously hopeful outlook. We could know this better than we do today. Let's take a crack at it. That's kind of wonder that we have the capacity for that hope. And thank goodness some people in our midst are inspired to take up those challenges. Steve.
To amplify your last point, as you've been talking, I've been remembering two movies. One of them, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5, maybe 10 years ago, Life is a Miracle, which is the story of a family caught in the Holocaust and how in each moment of that, they found a different way of seeing the world. And I found that the other movie I was thinking of was the French movie Chocolate. Again, a woman finding herself in a new place, and through her, people were experiencing life differently. And I find both of those miraculous movies that stimulate what it means to have wonder. Those were crossing my mind as you were talking.
Yeah, so Roberto Benigni, Life is a Miracle, the idea that even in a human catastrophe, there are still miraculous things occurring. Children are still being born and growing up. Butterflies are still flying through the air. There's an old story that I'm probably going to misquote. But a group of very religious people gets together in a concentration camp during the Second World War and puts God on trial. How could this happen? All these people being exterminated in death camps. Is it possible to sustain the view that the world is ruled by a just God? And maybe a verdict is reached, and maybe that verdict is God is guilty. This is clearly an offense against justice. This shouldn't have happened. But the people, so I'm told, who held that trial did what next? They gathered for evening prayers. You see, they in the midst of even a catastrophe, they had not lost their sense that the world is bigger than our capacity to encompass. It's not just that things are happening in the world that we can't control. It's that a lot that's happening is beyond our ken. I'm reminded of that every day in connection with radiology. Up until the year 1895, the greatest minds in human history were utterly unaware that there was an invisible form of electromagnetic radiation that we now call X-rays. Every one of us has encountered X-rays every day of our life. They're being emanated all the time by some of the most distant objects in the universe. By the way we know how big the universe is, 13.6 billion light years, that's because the most distant objects, which are moving away from us the fastest, are X-ray emitters. Aristotle, Plato, St. Augustine, they didn't know that there were X-rays. We do. How much of reality, even from our enlightened perch in the year 2008, how much of reality still remains unknown to us? I think that might be, in a sense, a faithful sentiment. We're making progress all the time. We think we understand more than people ever have before, but guess what? The volume of what we don't know probably still dwarfs what we do know. And in fact, some of the things we think we know will turn out to have been wrong, right? I mean, for centuries, people thought phlebotomy, bloodletting, was a good way. George Washington was probably bled to death in an effort to treat his pharyngitis, the pharyngitis that took his life. We think that's crazy now. Who knows? Maybe in the not-too-distant future, somebody's going to look back and say, you guys, wait a minute, let me get this straight. You guys were infusing poisons in your patient's blood to make them better? What were you thinking? Now that doesn't mean we adopt an attitude, well, we'll never know. What's the point in trying to know? We have to do our best. But maybe that captures something of the sense of awe that I think is best felt not by the ignorant, but by the wise. The people who studied the most are best equipped to understand the magnitude of what we don't understand. Any other questions or comments? Please, sir. I think that's a terrific question. It's a terribly important question. Anybody who deals with seriously ill and dying patients encounters this question fairly frequently. We don't want to make any big decisions about whether to withdraw respiratory support or something like that because we're waiting for a miracle. We're waiting for God to tell us what to do. We're never going to give up hope because to be hopeful is part of who we are. One can't speak to this question without incurring great risk of offending somebody. But let me suggest at least one possible approach. What is it we hope for? If we've placed our hope in immortality, then we've betrayed our own faith tradition. The faith tradition in which Lazarus dies in the story. A tradition where death plays a very important role in the possibility for life. What's the point of that? Maybe there are other things we can hope for. Maybe the question isn't, will I die? The question is, how will I die? Maybe the question isn't life or death, finally. The question is, what will this dying mean to me, to my family, to my friends? Maybe that's, you see this with patients, do not resuscitate. DNR, right, as we used to say. And there are new formulations of this. Do not resuscitate. I hear that and I think, my God, they're withdrawing care. They're going to stop caring for my mother. They're pulling back from my father. I can't let that. I could never be a party to that. I'm not going to sign something like that. That would be a betrayal of somebody I love. But it's not the beating of the heart, right? It's not just the ventilation of the lungs that's finally the most important part of our lives. There's something else going on, some other kind of meaning we can aspire to. And I think one of the best services we can perform to patients, for patients and families, and you don't do this in the first hour, but over the course of getting to know people, right, for days, maybe weeks, maybe months, what are the other possibilities here? We know that life is going to come to an end. What can we legitimately hope for here? Given the circumstances we find ourselves in, what would be a good death? A death that Mom, hard to say, a death that Mom would have been proud of. A death that might help us teach something to her grandchildren about what it means to die, and more importantly, what it means to live. There are no bullets flying through the air, but maybe this is an opportunity to learn an important lesson about courage and about compassion. This is pretty glib, but if we can approach those situations with those kind of aspirations in mind, I think there's the potential for good things to happen and for things to work out better than they sometimes otherwise do. Well, I see we've reached the end of our appointed hour. It's been a real treat for me to get to speak with you about this. I hope I sincerely apologize to anybody I've offended. The things I've gotten wrong weren't intentional. I'm doing the best I can, but I'm limited. And if any of you are of a mind to chat about this sort of stuff further, this is something I care deeply about, and I'd welcome the opportunity to do so. So thank you very much for coming today.